How to use ambiguity. Using ambiguity in your language can be very, very helpful. It can be used to make people laugh. It can be used to persuade people, and it can be used to fade people's brains, but it can also be used to avoid responsibility if things go south. In this video, we'll talk about all four of these. First, to make people laugh. Many jokes are based on various forms of linguistic ambiguity. What did the beach say when the tide came in? Long time no see. The word see is ambiguous, specifically something called phonological ambiguity. One sound, in this case see, but with two different meanings. The reason these riddles are funny and they make us laugh is because they are set up so our brain is forced to try to understand both meanings of the same word, see in this case, at the same time. So if you want to write your own jokes, first get a list of phonologically ambiguous words and see what you can come up with. Set up the question and then create a punchline so it forces the listener to try to understand the two different meanings of this ambiguous word at the same time. Second, to persuade people. Dale Carnegie once said that you can get anybody to do anything so long as they believe it was their idea. When you describe things ambiguously, your listeners will have to fill in the blanks on their own using their own imagination and their own experiences. That way it'll feel like their imagination. On the other hand, if you are giving them a very specific, very detailed picture, not only will it not be their imagination, but your content, the details, might be things that they don't really like that much. For example, imagine you are trying to get them thinking of a fantastic dining experience. If you use too much of what you would describe as an ideal dining experience in too much detail, it might not match with what they think is the ideal dining experience with all that rich detail. To do this persuasively, set up a whole sequence of these imaginations that are vague, that they will fill in the blanks on their own, that will lead to your conclusion. So even though you are doing all the talking, you are giving them the structures of these imaginations, they are filling in the details of these imaginations with their own ideas and their own experiences. So when they do come to the conclusion you want them to, it will be based on their ideas and not yours. So how do you make these interesting enough, but without giving them too much specific content, without too much specific details? Tell them about how you responded to the situation. For example, imagine the ideal dining experience. You can describe your response to the ideal dining experience by describing in great detail how you bit into that first bite of food and it was so delicious and you had to pace yourself and create this imagination of deliciousness without ever describing what the actual food was. You can talk about the super gorgeous waitress, but in terms of your own experience. How her gorgeous eyes made you forget who you were. How her gorgeous figure was more compelling than the food. How her sweet, warm smile made you forget your order. A third way to use ambiguity is to fade people's brains. Use so much ambiguity at the sentence level that their brains just give up. One way to do this is to use a lot of cause-effect statements using something called nominalizations. A nominalization is a verb that has been turned into a noun. Create, creativity. Educate, education. Confuse, confusion. These are also not only intangible nouns in that they only exist in our imagination, but they are also very hard to define. Stuff a bunch of these into a sentence and watch their brains turn into mush. Increasing creativity can lead to growing confidence. And when you have growing confidence, you'll need to find a lot more room for the increasing behavior that the growing confidence will cause. And because growing confidence is something that sometimes happens on its own, it can also lead to spontaneous realizations. And spontaneously realizing things doesn't mean that it later won't be more beneficial than you may have previously not have understood before. Another trick is to add in a bunch of what are called lack of referential indexes. This is when you drop in a few proper nouns and then follow these proper nouns up with a whole bunch of pronouns. Then it becomes confusing who is saying what, and then their brains will just turn into mush. I was fishing the other day with with my brother and his two friends, and he was telling him that increasing creativity can lead to growing confidence. But then he said that growing confidence doesn't necessarily mean that it won't come back different next time, which is why he kept looking at me and then looking back at his watch. I think he wanted to go somewhere else and do something more interesting because we weren't catching any fish. We ended up going to a strip club, and he was explaining to us this book he read about hypnotizing strippers. I mean, strippers are hypnotizing enough to begin with, but when they actually start to hypnotize you, you might wake up 3 days later next to a dumpster with all your money taken from your wallet. But then he told him that that was pretty funny, but that he just shook his head. The final way, at least in this video, to use ambiguity is to give directions ambiguously so you don't get blamed when things don't work out. Tell somebody to do something, but be specifically vague about it. That way, they'll have to figure out what to do on their own, and if they fail, you can blame them instead of your lamely ambiguous directions. Because, as you well know, ambiguous directions can lead to interesting conclusions. And if you want to create interest in your conclusions, it's generally easier than most people tend to remember things. And because remembering things is more based on the power of the thing being remembered than the thing doing the remembering, it will make your brain feel more foggy anyway. And your brain can become so foggy that you end up giving up and you make a decision to just forget everything. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment. To learn more, please visit mindpersuasion.com.